The massive warship drifted through the darkness of space like a metal mountain. Its hull stretched for miles, covered in weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single shot. Inside the ship, alien warriors moved with calm confidence. They had done this 1,000 times before. Commander Vex Timor stood on the bridge, his 6 arms folded behind his back. His purple skin gleamed under the blue lights, and his 4 eyes studied the star charts before him. The Zarathi had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Every species they met either joined them willingly or died fighting a hopeless war. "Commander," said his lieutenant, approaching with careful steps, "we have found another system. The scouts report a small blue planet with primitive life." Vex Timor barely glanced at the report. The numbers were always the same. Weak radio signals, basic chemical rockets, no energy shields, no plasma weapons. Another easy conquest for the mighty Zarathi hegemony. "How primitive?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would bore him. "They have just begun to explore their own star system, Commander. They fight among themselves with metal projectiles and explosive devices. Our scouts detected no energy weapons at all." Vex Timor made a sound that might have been laughter in another species. The Zarathi had conquered races that could bend space and time. They had destroyed civilizations that built weapons from pure energy. And now they were supposed to waste time on creatures that still use gunpowder? "Send them the standard surrender message," he ordered. "Give them 1 solar cycle to submit. If they refuse, we will demonstrate our power." The lieutenant hesitated. "Commander, the War Council suggests we might not need the full fleet for such a primitive world." "Perhaps a few ships would be enough?" This time Vex Timor did laugh. His voice echoed through the bridge like thunder. "You think I should fear creatures that cannot even leave their own star system? Very well. Take half the fleet and return to base. We will handle this ourselves." As the lieutenant bowed and left, Vex Timor returned to his charts. In his long career, he had personally overseen the conquest of 47 worlds. Some had tried to resist. The Kelhari had energy shields that could stop most weapons. The Northak had ships that could move faster than light. The Vexturi had minds that could predict the future. All of them now served the hegemony or lay dead on their homeworlds. The Zarathi way of war was simple and effective. First, they would arrive in overwhelming numbers. Their ships would blot out the star and fill the enemy's sky with terror. Then they would demonstrate their power by destroying a few military targets. Finally, they would offer terms: surrender completely or watch your world burn. Most species chose surrender. The smart ones, anyway. Vex Timor walked to the great window that looked out into space. His reflection stared back at him, tall, powerful, with the scars of 100 battles marking his purple skin. He had earned his rank through strength and cunning. In Zarathi society, only the strongest survived to lead. "Commander," another voice called. This time it was Navigation Officer Kethva Rin. "We are ready to enter hyperspace. The journey to the primitive world will take 15 cycles. Good. And what do our files say about this species? Do they have a name?" Kethva Rin consulted his datapad. "They call themselves humans, Commander. They appear to be a young race, perhaps 50,000 years old. They have only recently developed spaceflight and have not yet unified their world under a single government. Still fighting among themselves?" Vex Timor found this amusing. Most primitive species did this. They wasted their energy on petty conflicts instead of preparing for the real threats that waited in the darkness between stars. "Yes, Commander. Our scouts report constant warfare across their planet. They seem particularly fond of large-scale destruction." "Then they will understand our power when they see it," Vex Timor said. "Primitive species always respect strength. Once we destroy a few of their cities, the survivors will beg to serve us." The great ship shuddered as it entered hyperspace. Around them, space twisted and bent, allowing them to cross vast distances in mere days instead of centuries. It was technology the humans could not even dream of possessing. Vex Timor made his way to his private quarters. The room was filled with trophies from his conquests, weapons, art, and skulls from dozens of defeated species. Each one represented a world that had thought itself strong enough to resist the Zarathi. Each one had been wrong. He picked up a crystalline sword from the Yavet homeworld. The Yavet had been warriors, much like the Zarathi themselves. They had fought bravely, using tactics and strategies that had impressed even his veteran soldiers. But in the end, their courage had not been enough to overcome Zarathi technology and numbers. None of them ever were. His personal communicator chimed. It was Fleet Admiral Zarek Voss, his superior and one of the most feared Zarathi commanders in the galaxy. Vextai Moore, the Admiral's voice crackled through the device. I hear you are handling a primitive world with reduced forces. Yes, Admiral. The creatures barely have spaceflight. I saw no need to waste the hegemony's resources on such weak prey. Good thinking. Quick, efficient conquest builds our reputation. How long do you estimate the campaign will take? Vextai Moore considered the question. Most primitive worlds surrendered within hours of first contact. The longest resistance he had ever faced from such a weak species was 3 days. And that was only because their leaders had been too scattered to communicate surrender terms quickly. No more than 1 cycle, Admiral. Perhaps less if their leaders show proper wisdom. Excellent. The War Council has new targets for you once this is complete. There are rumors of a species in the Andorak sector that has developed energy shields. They may actually provide some entertainment. After the call ended, Vextai Moore returned to studying the data about humanity. The species seemed remarkably unremarkable. Average intelligence. Average strength. No special abilities or technologies. They had not even developed faster-than-light travel. What they did have was an unusual tendency toward violence. The reports mentioned constant warfare, innovative weapons, and a remarkable ability to cause destruction. But this did not concern him. Many primitive species were violent. It usually made conquest easier, as they often destroyed themselves before the Zarathi arrived. As he prepared for sleep, Vextai Moore felt the familiar satisfaction that came before an easy victory. Tomorrow they would arrive at the human homeworld. He would broadcast the surrender terms. The humans would see his ships filling their sky and understand their hopeless situation. By the next evening, another species would kneel before Zarathi might. It had always been this way. It would always be this way. The Zarathi were invincible after all. The first thing Admiral Sarachen noticed was how the morning sky had changed color. Instead of the usual blue, it was now filled with dark shapes that blocked out the sun. She stood on the deck of the USS Enterprise, humanity's newest aircraft carrier, and watched through her binoculars as alien ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. Admiral, her communications officer called out, we're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. It's not from any human source. Sarah lowered her binoculars and walked to the communications station. Around her, sailors and officers worked with practiced efficiency, but she could see the fear in their eyes. Everyone on Earth had been watching the news for the past 12 hours. Ever since the massive ships had appeared at the edge of the solar system. Put it through the speakers, she ordered. A harsh alien voice filled the bridge. The words were clearly human languages but spoken badly, as if the speaker was reading from a poorly written translation. Primitive humans of the third planet. We are the Zarathi hegemony. Your world is now claimed for our empire. You will surrender all military forces immediately. You will submit to our authority. Resistance is useless. You have one of your solar cycles to comply. If you refuse, your cities will be destroyed. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in complete silence. Sarah had been expecting this moment ever since humanity's deep space telescopes had detected the approaching fleet. The world's leaders had been meeting in emergency sessions for hours, trying to decide how to respond. The answer had been surprisingly simple. They would fight. Get me a channel to all human military commanders, Sarah ordered. It's time to show these aliens what they're dealing with. As her communications officer worked to establish the connection, Sarah looked out at the alien ships. They were massive, each one larger than any city on Earth. Their hulls gleamed with unknown metals and strange lights pulsed along their surfaces. She counted at least 50 of them hovering in Earth's atmosphere. Any reasonable person would look at those ships and surrender immediately. Sarah, Chen was not particularly reasonable. Admiral, the communications officer said, you have connections to military commanders in every major nation. The president is also standing by. Sarah picked up the microphone and took a deep breath. In the next few minutes, she would either help save humanity or lead them into a glorious last stand. This is Admiral Chen to all human forces. You've seen the ships. You've heard their demands. Every government on Earth has agreed we will not surrender. We will not kneel. We will show these aliens that humanity does not go quietly into the darkness. She paused, looking around at the faces of her crew, young men and women who had joined the Navy to serve their country, never imagining they would be called upon to defend their entire species. The enemy believes we are primitive. They think our weapons are useless against their technology. They expect us to panic and beg for mercy. Let's prove them wrong. All units prepare for combat operations. Show them what humans do when backed into a corner. The response was immediate. Across the globe, military bases came alive with activity. Fighter jets launched from aircraft carriers. Submarines moved into attack positions. Missile silos prepared their weapons. It was the largest military mobilization in human history. The aliens had given humanity one day to surrender. Instead, humanity spent that day preparing for war. Commander Vextai Moore watched the human preparations with growing confusion. His sensors showed military vehicles moving across the planet's surface. Aircraft were launching from various bases. Ships were positioning themselves in what appeared to be attack formations. "They're not evacuating," his lieutenant reported. "Commander, they seem to be preparing to fight us." Vextai Moore studied the data feeds with his 4 eyes. In his experience, primitive species usually responded to Zarathi demands in one of 2 ways. Either they surrendered immediately, or they panicked and their civilization collapsed into chaos as everyone tried to flee or hide. The humans were doing neither. "Perhaps they don't understand our message," he mused. "Send the transmission again. Make the consequences clearer." The second message was more direct. The Zarathi used their weapons to destroy an abandoned military base in the middle of a desert. The explosion could be seen from orbit, a pillar of fire that reached into the sky. The human response was not what Vextai Moore expected. Instead of surrendering, every human military unit on the planet began moving toward Zarathi positions. "Commander," his weapons officer called out, "we're detecting multiple launch signatures from the planet's surface. They appear to be sending missiles toward our ships." Vextai Moore watched in amazement as hundreds of primitive missiles rose from Earth's surface. The weapons moved slowly compared to Zarathi technology. His ship's defense systems destroyed most of them easily, but not all of them. The first human weapon to penetrate Zarathi shields was a nuclear missile that had been modified by desperate scientists working through the night. It struck a Zarathi scout ship and detonated with the force of a small star. The scout ship survived, but its hull was scorched, and several of its weapon systems were damaged. For the first time in his career, Vextai Moore felt something he had never experienced before: surprise. "Return fire," he ordered. "Destroy their launch sites." Zarathi plasma beams lanced down from the sky, turning missile bases into craters of melted rock. But as soon as one site was destroyed, humans launched attacks from new locations. They were using mobile launchers, hiding weapons in forests and mountains, firing from moving vehicles. And they kept coming. Admiral Chen watched the first Zarathi counterattack from the bridge of her carrier. The aliens' weapons were incredibly powerful. Each shot could destroy an entire military base. But they seemed confused by humanity's tactics. The aliens fought like an empire that had grown used to easy victories. Their ships stayed in predictable formations. They targeted obvious military installations. They followed patterns that suggested they expected their enemies to fight like them. Humans did not fight like them. "Launch all aircraft," Sarah ordered. "Tell them to attack anything that looks important, but don't engage directly. I want hit-and-run attacks. Make them chase us." Across the planet, human forces began to implement tactics that had been developed over centuries of warfare. Guerrilla attacks from hidden positions, feints and withdrawals that drew enemy forces into traps, sacrificial attacks that tied up larger enemy formations. The Zarathi had superior technology, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules. When the first day of battle ended, both sides were shocked by the results. The Zarathi had destroyed dozens of human military installations and killed thousands of soldiers. By any reasonable measure, they were winning, but they had also lost 3 ships to human attacks. 3 of their supposedly invincible vessels had been damaged or destroyed by a species that barely had spaceflight. In his private quarters, Vextai Moore stared at the battle reports and tried to understand what had gone wrong. The humans should have surrendered by now. Instead, they seemed to be fighting harder than ever. He was beginning to suspect that these primitive creatures might not be as easy to defeat as he had assumed. On Earth, Admiral Chen was reaching the same conclusion about their alien visitors. The enemy was powerful, but they could be hurt. And if they could be hurt, they could be beaten. The war for Earth had only just begun. Dr. Elena Vasquez had not slept in 3 days. Her laboratory at the underground research facility looked like a war zone itself. Broken alien technology scattered across every surface, computer screens showing endless streams of data, and the burnt smell of overheated electronics filling the air. In her hands, she held a piece of metal that had come from a destroyed Zarathi scout ship. It was unlike anything humans had ever seen before. The material was incredibly light but stronger than steel. It seemed to absorb energy and redirect it in ways that human science could barely understand. "Elena," called Dr. James Park from across the lab. "I think I've figured out how their plasma weapons work. The energy source is completely different from anything we use, but the basic principles, we might be able to copy them." Elena looked up from her work, her eyes red from exhaustion. Around the world, similar scenes were playing out in dozens of secret laboratories. Humanity had always been good at one thing above all others: learning from their enemies and adapting quickly to new situations. 3 weeks had passed since the first Zarathi attack. The aliens controlled Earth's skies, but they had discovered that controlling the sky did not mean controlling the planet. Human forces had retreated underground into forests and into cities where the aliens' massive ships could not easily follow. And everywhere humans went, they brought pieces of Zarathi technology with them. "Show me," Elena said. Walking over to James's workstation, on his computer screen, James had created a detailed analysis of a Zarathi plasma rifle that had been recovered from a damaged landing craft. The weapon was far more advanced than anything humans possessed, but James had managed to understand its basic operation. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a diagram. "They use a contained magnetic field to compress and accelerate charged particles. It's brilliant, but it's not magic. We can't build one exactly like theirs, but we can make something similar using human technology." Elena nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "How long would it take to build a prototype?" "Give me a week and access to a military weapons lab. I can't promise it will be as powerful as theirs, but it should be enough to hurt them." This was exactly what Elena had hoped to hear. Across the globe, human scientists and engineers were working around the clock to understand and copy alien technology. Every piece of wreckage was studied. Every damaged alien device was taken apart and analyzed. The Zarathi had made a critical mistake. They assumed that because humans were primitive, they would remain primitive. Captain Marcus Rodriguez crouched in the ruins of what had once been downtown Los Angeles. His squad of 12 soldiers moved quietly through the wreckage, heading toward their target, a Zarathi command post that had been set up in the remains of a shopping mall. Marcus had been a Marine for 15 years before the invasion began. He had fought in conflicts around the world and thought he had seen every kind of warfare possible. But fighting aliens required completely new tactics. "Rodriguez," whispered Sergeant Kim Walsh over his radio. "I have eyes on the target. 4 guards outside, probably more inside." Marcus checked his equipment one final time. His rifle was still human-made, but it now fired ammunition that had been modified using captured alien technology. The bullets were coated with a material that could penetrate Zarathi armor. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than what they had started with. "Remember the plan," Marcus said to his squad. "Hit hard, hit fast, and get out before their reinforcements arrive. We're not trying to hold ground, we're trying to hurt them and take their equipment." This was the new human way of war. Small groups attacking isolated enemy positions. Quick strikes followed by immediate withdrawal. Never fighting fair when they could fight smart instead. The attack began with a carefully placed explosive device that knocked out the aliens' communication equipment. Before the guards could react, Marcus and his squad opened fire from 3 different directions. The Zarathi guards were tough and well-trained, but they were used to fighting enemies who faced them directly in open battle. They were not prepared for humans who attacked from hidden positions and disappeared back into the ruins before they could mount a counterattack. In less than 5 minutes, the command post was destroyed, and Marcus's squad had captured several pieces of alien equipment. More importantly, they had proven once again that the supposedly invincible Zarathi could be defeated by human courage and cleverness. Commander Vex Ty Moore stood in his command center, studying reports that made less sense each day. His forces controlled every major city on Earth. His ships dominated the planet's atmosphere. By all military logic, the humans should have surrendered weeks ago. Instead, they seemed to be getting stronger. "Commander," his intelligence officer reported, "we've lost another supply convoy. The humans attacked with weapons that appear to be based on our own technology. Vex Timor felt his temper rising. How is this possible? These creatures barely understand spaceflight. How can they copy our weapons so quickly? We're not certain, Commander, but our technical analysts believe they are reverse engineering our equipment at an incredible rate. They seem to learn from every piece of wreckage we leave behind. This was a problem Vex Timor had never encountered before. Most species the Zarathi conquered were either too primitive to understand alien technology or too civilized to adapt quickly to warfare. Humans appeared to be both primitive enough to think creatively and advanced enough to make their ideas work. What about their resistance movements? He asked. Growing stronger, Commander. We estimate there are now over 1,000 separate human military groups operating across the planet. Every time we destroy one, 2 more seem to appear. Vex Timor walked to the great window that looked down at Earth. From space, the planet looked peaceful, but he knew that beneath the clouds, thousands of humans were planning new ways to hurt his forces. Double our patrols, he ordered. Increase security around all our installations, and I want every piece of our technology recovered or destroyed when we abandon a position. As his officers hurried to carry out his orders, Vex Timor realized he was facing a new kind of enemy. The humans did not fight like any species he had encountered before. They did not seem to understand that they were supposed to lose. In a hidden bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Sarah Chen met with leaders from around the world. The meeting was conducted over secure communications, as the participants were scattered across the globe in various underground command centers. Report from the European theater, said General Pierre Dubois over the video link. Our forces have successfully captured a Zarathi supply depot. The technology we recovered includes what appears to be their communication system. Excellent, Sarah replied. What about Asia? General Liu Wei appeared on another screen. Chinese and Japanese forces have been working together to modify captured alien weapons. We believe we can mass-produce a version of their plasma rifles within 6 months. Sarah nodded with satisfaction. The aliens had expected humanity to collapse under pressure. Instead, the invasion had done something that centuries of diplomacy had failed to achieve. It had united the human race against a common enemy. There's something else, said Dr. Elena Vasquez, joining the call from her laboratory. We've made a breakthrough in understanding their energy shields. We think we know how to overload them. How long until we can build a weapon that can penetrate their defenses? Sarah asked. Give us 2 months, Elena replied. Maybe less if we can capture more of their equipment. As the meeting continued, Sarah felt something she had not experienced since the invasion began. Hope. The aliens were powerful, but they had made a fundamental error. They had assumed that humans would fight like every other species they had conquered. They were about to learn that humans did not surrender. They adapted. They learned. They became stronger, and they never, ever gave up. Outside the bunker, the war continued. Human forces struck at alien positions around the clock. Each attack taught them something new about their enemy. Each victory, no matter how small, proved that the invaders could be beaten. The Zarathi had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had found an enemy that grew more dangerous with each passing day. They had awakened something in humanity that they did not understand and could not control: the refusal to accept defeat. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison watched through his scope as the Zarathi dropships descended through the morning clouds. These were not the usual alien transports he had seen before. These ships were sleeker, faster, and covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Colonel, whispered his communications specialist. Command says those are Kethvar troops. Elite warriors. Intelligence believes they've never been defeated in battle. James adjusted his position on the rooftop overlooking the landing zone. Around him, hidden throughout the ruins of Detroit, 500 human soldiers waited for his signal. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, the Zarathi's final attempt to crush human resistance. Well, James said quietly into his radio, I guess it's time to give them their first defeat. 6 months had passed since the invasion began. In that time, humanity had transformed itself from a planet of separate nations into a single species united in war. The scattered resistance movements had grown into organized armies. Scientists had reverse-engineered alien technology to create new weapons. Most importantly, humans had learned how to fight an enemy that had seemed impossible to defeat. The Kethvar were the Zarathi's answer to humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender. These elite warriors had conquered civilizations that spanned multiple star systems. They were stronger, faster, and more experienced than regular Zarathi soldiers. Their armor could withstand direct hits from most human weapons, and their training made them perfect killing machines. Commander Vextai Moore had finally called for them after losing 12 more ships to human attacks in the past month. The primitive creatures of Earth had proven surprisingly difficult to defeat. But the Kethvar would end this embarrassing conflict once and for all. The first dropship touched down in the center of the landing zone. Its doors opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and the Kethvar emerged. James had seen recordings of these aliens before, but seeing them in person was different. They moved like predators, each step calculated and precise. Their black armor seemed to absorb light, making them look like shadows given deadly form. Energy weapons hummed in their six-fingered hands. "All units," James whispered into his radio. "Wait for my signal. Let them get clear of their ships." The Kethvar advanced in perfect formation. They had done this countless times before on dozens of worlds. Their tactics were flawless, their discipline absolute. They expected the primitive humans to either flee in terror or charge directly into their weapons. The humans did neither. James waited until the elite warriors were exactly where he wanted them, then spoke one word into his radio. "Now." The attack came from everywhere at once. Buildings that appeared to be empty ruins suddenly erupted with gunfire. Streets that seemed clear revealed hidden explosives. The sky filled with missiles launched from concealed positions throughout the city. But these were not the crude human weapons the Kethvar had expected to face. Over the past 6 months, human engineers had been busy. The bullets were now coated with materials that could penetrate alien armor. The explosives used alien power sources that made them 10 times more destructive. The missiles were guided by computer systems that had been built using captured Zarathi technology, the perfect Kethvar. Formation dissolved into chaos as warriors fell to weapons they had not expected primitive humans to possess. "Move," James shouted to his squad. "Hit them while they're confused." Human soldiers poured out of their hiding places, attacking with a fury that shocked the alien warriors. The Kethvar had faced many enemies in their long careers, but never one that fought with such desperate creativity. Where the aliens expected traditional military tactics, humans used urban warfare techniques that turned every building into a fortress and every street into a battlefield. Where the Kethvar relied on superior technology, humans countered with superior knowledge of their own planet and an absolute refusal to give up. The battle raged for 3 hours. When it was over, the elite Kethvar forces were retreating to their ships, carrying their wounded and leaving behind equipment that human forces quickly claimed for study. For the first time in their history, the Invincible Kethvar had been defeated. In his command ship high above Earth, Commander Vextai Moore stared at the battle reports in stunned silence. The impossible had happened. His elite warriors, troops that had never known defeat, had been forced to retreat by primitive humans using modified versions of Zarathi technology. "Commander," his lieutenant said carefully, "Fleet Admiral Zarek Voss is requesting a communication link." Vextai Moore knew this conversation would not go well. He had assured his superiors that Earth would be conquered quickly and easily. Instead, the campaign had dragged on for months, cost the hegemony dozens of ships, and now resulted in the first defeat of Kethvar forces in recorded history. "Put him through," Vextai Moore said, dreading what was to come. The Admiral's image appeared on the main screen, his 4 eyes burning with anger. "Vextai Moore, explain to me how a species that barely has spaceflight just defeated our finest warriors." "Admiral, the humans are unusual. They do not fight as other species have fought. They adapt quickly to our tactics and seem to learn from every engagement." "Are you telling me that you cannot defeat primitives who use metal projectiles and chemical explosives?" Vextai Moore wanted to explain that the humans no longer used only primitive weapons. They had reverse-engineered Zarathi technology and combined it with their own innovations to create hybrid weapons that were surprisingly effective. But he knew the Admiral would not want to hear excuses. "We are encountering unexpected resistance, Admiral." "Unexpected resistance?" The Admiral's voice rose to a roar. "You have been fighting these creatures for 6 months. Every other species in the galaxy has heard about your failures. Our enemies are beginning to wonder if the Zarathi are truly as invincible as we claim." This was Vextai Moore's greatest fear. The Zarathi Empire was built on a reputation for inevitable victory. If other species began to believe that the Zarathi could be defeated, rebellions would break out across the galaxy. What are your orders, Admiral? End this embarrassment immediately. Use whatever force is necessary. Destroy their cities if you must, but I want this planet conquered or burned within one lunar cycle. After the communication ended, Vextai Moore stood alone in his command center, considering his options. He could bombard Earth from orbit, turning its cities into radioactive craters, but that would destroy the planet's value as a conquest and prove to the galaxy that the Zarathi could only win by destroying what they could not conquer. Or he could continue fighting a ground war against an enemy that seemed to become stronger with each battle. Neither option was appealing. On Earth, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison stood in the ruins of the Kethvar landing zone, examining the alien equipment his forces had captured. The weapons were incredibly advanced, but human engineers were already figuring out how they worked. "Colonel," said Dr. Sarah Kim, the scientist who had been assigned to his unit, "this armor uses an energy field to deflect incoming projectiles. If we can understand how it works, we might be able to build something similar." James nodded, but his mind was on larger concerns. The victory over the Kethvar was important, but it would not end the war. The aliens still had hundreds of ships and thousands of soldiers. They could still destroy human cities from orbit if they chose to. But something had changed. For the first time since the invasion began, James believed that humanity could actually win this war. The aliens were not invincible. They could be hurt, they could be confused, and they could be defeated. "Keep working on that armor," he told Dr. Kim. "And send everything we learned about Kethvar tactics to command. Other units need to know how to fight them." As James walked through the battlefield, he saw human soldiers stripping equipment from defeated alien warriors. 6 months ago, these same soldiers would have been helpless against Zarathi technology. Now they were using it against its creators. The aliens had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that because humans were primitive, they would stay primitive. Instead, humanity had proven its greatest strength: the ability to learn, adapt, and overcome any challenge. The war was far from over. But for the first time, James Morrison believed that Earth's warriors might actually prove the invaders wrong about human capabilities. The tide was turning, and the aliens were beginning to realize that they had seriously underestimated their supposedly primitive enemies. General Patricia Wong stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Defiance, watching as her fleet moved into attack formation. The ship beneath her feet was a marvel of human engineering, part captured alien technology, part human innovation, and entirely dedicated to one purpose: driving the invaders away from Earth forever. 8 months had passed since the Zarathi first arrived. 8 months of learning, fighting, and dying. But also 8 months of proving that humanity would not be conquered by anyone. "General," reported Captain Lisa Santos, "all ships are in position. The Zarathi fleet is maintaining standard formation around their command vessel." Patricia nodded, her eyes fixed on the massive alien ship that hung in space before them. Commander Vextai Moore's flagship was 3 times larger than any human vessel, armed with weapons that could destroy cities, and protected by shields that had never been penetrated by enemy fire. Today, all of that would change. "Signal all ships," Patricia ordered. "Operation Sunrise begins now." Across the solar system, human forces moved into action. This was not just a space battle. It was humanity's final answer to 8 months of occupation. On Earth's surface, resistance fighters launched coordinated attacks against every Zarathi installation. In Earth's orbit, a fleet of ships built from alien technology and human determination prepared to face an enemy that had never been defeated. Commander Vextai Moore watched the approaching human fleet with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The primitive creatures had somehow built actual spaceships, dozens of them. The vessels were crude compared to Zarathi technology, but they were real, and they were heading directly toward his position. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his officers. "These creatures had barely achieved orbit when we arrived." "Commander," his intelligence officer replied nervously, "our analysis suggests they have been reverse engineering our technology at an accelerated rate. They appear to have combined our systems with their own engineering approaches." Vextai Moore studied the enemy ships more carefully. They were clearly built from salvaged Zarathi components. but the humans had modified them in ways that made no sense according to proper military doctrine. Some ships bristled with weapons in configurations that seemed random. Others appeared to be mobile factories or repair facilities. They don't even understand proper ship design, he muttered. How do they expect to fight us with such poorly constructed vessels? He was about to learn that humans had never been particularly concerned with fighting fair. The first human attack came not from their ships, but from Earth itself. Massive railguns that had been built in secret launched projectiles at near light speed toward the Zarathi fleet. The weapons were crude but effective, solid metal slugs accelerated by magnetic fields that human engineers had copied from captured alien technology. Most of the projectiles were stopped by Zarathi shields, but a few got through, damaging ships that had never been hurt by enemy fire before. Return fire, Vextai Moore ordered. Destroy those surface installations. Zarathi plasma beams lanced down toward Earth, but they struck empty launch sites. The humans had learned from 8 months of warfare. They used mobile weapons that fired once and then moved to new positions. Before Vextai Moore could react to the surface attack, the human fleet opened fire. Their weapons were a chaotic mix of human and alien technology. Some ships fired missiles that split apart to reveal smaller warheads. Others used energy beams that seemed to bend and twist through space. A few launched what appeared to be metallic nets that spread out to entangle Zarathi fighters. These tactics make no sense, Vextai Moore's weapons officer complained. They're not following any known military doctrine. That was exactly the point. Humans had spent 8 months learning how the Zarathi fought, and then had designed their attack to break every rule the aliens expected their enemies to follow. Patricia Wong smiled grimly as she watched the chaos unfolding around the Zarathi fleet. Human forces were using every dirty trick they had learned during 8 months of guerrilla warfare. Ships that appeared to be retreating suddenly revealed hidden weapons. Vessels that looked damaged turned out to be filled with explosives. Communication signals that seemed like surrender requests were actually viruses designed to disrupt alien computer systems. General, reported her communications officer, the Zarathi are requesting a parley. They want to discuss terms. Terms? Patricia laughed. Tell them we have terms. Pack up and leave our solar system. Never come back. And spread the word to every other alien empire that Earth is not for conquest. The battle continued for 6 hours. Human ships that were destroyed by Zarathi weapons turned out to have been remotely piloted. Their crews were safe on other vessels. Zarathi fighters found themselves trapped by human tactics that made no sense but were devastatingly effective. Most importantly, the humans were not trying to win a glorious victory. They were trying to send a message that would be heard across the galaxy. Earth would fight anyone who threatened it, and Earth would never surrender. As his flagship shuddered under another human attack, Commander Vextai Moore finally understood what he was facing. These were not primitive creatures trying to fight a civilized war. These were survivors who had spent 8 months learning how to hurt enemies that were stronger, faster, and better equipped than they were. Commander, his damage control officer reported, we've lost main power to the weapons array. The humans have somehow overloaded our shield generators, and our communication system has been infected with some kind of virus that's spreading to other ships. Vextai Moore looked around his command center. Half his screen showed error messages. Alien-human hybrid viruses were corrupting his computer systems. His supposedly invincible fleet was being defeated by creatures that had barely achieved space flight less than a year ago. Open a channel. To the human fleet, he ordered. Quietly, General Wong's face appeared on his main screen. She looked tired, scarred by months of warfare but absolutely determined. Commander Vextai Moore, she said, are you ready to discuss our terms? What do you want? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Simple. Leave. Take your fleet and go back to whatever part of the galaxy you came from. Never return to this solar system. And make sure every other alien empire knows that Earth is under human protection. Vextai Moore wanted to refuse. The Zarathi did not negotiate with primitives. They did not retreat from inferior enemies. But as he looked at the battle report scrolling across his screens, he realized he had no choice. His fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought unlike anyone he had ever faced. If he continued this battle, he would lose everything: his ships, his soldiers, and his life. And if we refuse? He asked. Patricia Wong's smile was sharp as a blade. Then we'll destroy every ship you have and use the wreckage to build bigger weapons. And when the next alien fleet arrives at Earth, They'll find humans who are even better prepared to defend themselves. The threat was clear. The humans were not asking for mercy. They were offering the Zarathi a chance to leave with their lives. "We accept your terms," Vextai Moore said, each word painful to speak. As the Zarathi fleet began its retreat from Earth, Patricia Wong stood on her bridge and watched them go. Around her, human ships celebrated their victory, but she felt no joy. Too many people had died in the past 8 months. Too many cities had been destroyed, but humanity had proven something important. They had shown the galaxy that Earth's warriors would not be conquered by anyone, no matter how advanced or powerful. "General," her communications officer said, "we're receiving messages from across the planet. Every human government wants to thank you for leading the defense." Patricia shook her head. "I didn't win this war. Humanity won it. Every soldier who fought, every scientist who built new weapons, every civilian who refused to give up, they all won this war." As Earth began to rebuild, word of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy. The Zarathi, who had been considered invincible for thousands of years, had been defeated by a species that barely had spaceflight. Other alien empires took note. Some decided that humans were too dangerous to threaten. Others began to wonder if the supposedly primitive species might make valuable allies. But all of them learned the same lesson. Earth's warriors had proven that determination, creativity, and the refusal to surrender could overcome any technological advantage. The humans had believed themselves capable of victory when everyone else thought they would be easily conquered. And they had been right. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating humanity.